Taoism is a philosophical school of thought that came from China. It emphasizes on living in accordance with the Tao, or perhaps it is more accurate to say, flow along with the Tao, the law of the universe. One of the most important principles of Taoism is the principle of Wu Wei, or action through inaction, because sometimes things will work out better with less intervention and bureaucracy. In the West, Taoism has got quite a following from the literary gentry. High-profile writers such as Alan Watts, Ursula Le Guin, Oscar Wilde, and even the rap legend RZA has shown appreciation for this gentle anarchist philosophy. It is perceived as the thinking person's philosophy. Meanwhile, back in Asia, Taoism is experienced as a bundle of ball-busting superstition, magical thinking, and religious woo-woo. So, what is Taoism really about then? Well, the answer is kinda complicated, so stick with me because I'm going to talk about the real Taoism that's not taught in your textbook. Tao Te Ching is the most important book in Taoism. It is traditionally believed to be written by Lao Tzu. He may have lived somewhere in between 6th or 4th century before Common Era, but most scholars believe that he was a legendary figure. Even though he was credited for the writing of the most important book in Taoism, he was not the creator of the school of thought called Daoism. During the Spring and Autumn and Warring States era, between 6th to 3rd century BCE, China had a flourishing free marketplace of ideas. Countless philosophers debated each other and they constantly refined their own ideas. They were collectively called the 100 Schools of Thought. But this grouping and classification of schools of thought only came a few hundred years after, when historians in the Han Dynasty cataloged the different intellectual strains of thoughts into their respective schools. Confucianism and Mohism had their own organization, so their schools of thought could be easily identified. But the others, like legalism, yin-yang, and Daoism, were grouped together by the historians who think that the texts covered similar topics. Even by the time of the earliest categorical grouping of Daoism, Daoism was seen in the context of the political religious practices of the Huang Daoism. Huang Taoism is the combination of the veneration of the Yellow Emperor Huang and Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. The Yellow Emperor was a legendary figure from the antiquity who was credited as the originator of Chinese culture and traditional Chinese medicine. But the earliest evidence of his worship only dates as far back as the Warring States. And somewhere along the way, he became the paragon of the Taoist ruler who had perfectly applied the principles of Tao Te Ching into his rule. Some modern writers like to make the distinction between philosophical Taoism and religious Taoism, but this division is mostly a modern phenomenon, done by those who perhaps want to gentrify Taoism to the modern Western taste. But the fact is, the religious and political aspects of Taoism had never been conceived to be separate, even all the way back to the beginning. Eventually, Taoism absorbed more metaphysical concepts such as yin-yang and the 5 elements from the school of yin-yang. Even though the concept of yin-yang is so inextricably linked to Taoism now, if you read the Tao Te Ching, you would know that yin-yang was only mentioned in there once. It only appeared more often in Zhuangzi, a Taoist canon written later. Exorcism, alchemy, qigong, and other magical practices were also associated with Taoism. One of the biggest problems with Taoism is the lack of orthodoxy. Almost anything can be absorbed into Taoism, and thus anything can also be claimed as Taoism. That is why there were so many Taoist cults appearing near the end of the Han Dynasty. And since the empire had turned corrupt and was crumbling apart, some of the Taoist sects became rebels and started bloody uprisings. Some of them even established their own theocracy. One of the most famous sects was the Way of the Great Peace, which launched the Yellow Turban Rebellion that hastened the demise of the Han Dynasty. Fun fact, the Yellow Turban was also featured as the antagonist group in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms historical novel. Another Taoist sect that rose at the time was the Way of the Celestial Master. They established a theocracy in Hanzong until it surrendered to Cao Cao prior to the Three Kingdoms period. The latter survive up to this day, but it is just one among the many Taoist sects out there. Taoism only gained some form of consistency during the Tang Dynasty because it was supported by the emperor, who thought that he was a descendant of Lao Tzu because both of them share the same surname, Li. But still, they failed to establish a Taoist orthodoxy. In fact, they did the opposite because they blurred the practices of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism into a politically convenient slurry. The Ming Dynasty government tried to codify Taoism again, but it did not succeed either. As time goes on, more and more Taoist sects appeared, bringing with them their own sets of practices and belief systems. But there has never been any form of Taoism in the history of China that's devoid of any religious component. In fact, purely philosophical Taoism was non-existent. Ironically, philosophical Taoism was more often discussed in the context of other schools of thoughts and religion, such as legalism and Buddhism. Han Feizi borrowed the concept of Wu Wei from the application of his legalist philosophy, and Buddhism in China borrowed Taoist philosophical ideas to develop into the Chan school of Buddhism, which is also known as Zen Buddhism in Japan. So, the secular Taoism you see in the West is really just an aberration in the long line of Taoist tradition. But then again, when compared to all the different and unusual Taoist sects out there, do you think that secular Western Taoism is any more unusual to the rest of them? In my opinion, they are not really that different to the new cults and sects that pop up throughout history. It is just a new style of Taoism that is adapted to a different lifestyle. Besides, isn't Taoism all about flowing with the current? Well, anyway, that's just my opinion. But what do you think? Do you think that Western Taoism should be considered Taoism? Or do you think that it is just a product of New Age spirituality? Comment below. As always, give the videos a thumbs up if you liked it, and if you like history from Asia and other parts of the world, then you should subscribe because we release a video at least once a week. Until next time, stay cool, my bros.